The year was 1501, and Rome writhed beneath the weight of corruption so profound that even the stones of St. Peter's Basilica seemed to weep. In the hallowed halls of the Vatican, where Christ's vicar was meant to shepherd the faithful toward salvation, a different kind of shepherd had taken residence, one whose appetites ran not toward the divine, but toward the most base and carnal pleasures imaginable. The man who sat upon the throne of St. Peter was Rodrigo Borgia, known to history as Pope Alexander VI, and the stories that emerge from his papal apartments would make even the most depraved Roman emperor blush with shame. What we are about to explore is not merely another tale of clerical misconduct or papal politics gone awry. This is the story of how the highest office in Christendom became a playground for perversions so extreme that they challenged the very foundations of moral authority. The popular imagination has sanitized many aspects of medieval and Renaissance corruption, reducing complex webs of depravity to simple tales of greed or ambition. But the reality of Alexander VI's reign was far more sinister and infinitely more shocking than most dare acknowledge. The Vatican had always been a place where earthly power intersected with spiritual authority, but under Borgia's rule it transformed into something resembling a brothel more than a holy sanctuary. Contemporary accounts describe orgies held within the papal apartments themselves, with prostitutes and courtesans freely wandering the corridors where pilgrims came seeking absolution. This was not merely corruption, but a systematic inversion of everything the Catholic Church claimed to represent. A deliberate mockery of sacred vows conducted by the man charged with upholding them. Today, we strip away the diplomatic language of church historians and examine the unflinching reality of what transpired within those marble walls. To understand the full scope of Alexander VI's depravity, we must first grasp the world that made such corruption possible. Renaissance Rome in the late 15th and early 16th centuries was a city where spiritual authority competed directly with temporal power, where the sacred and profane existed in uncomfortable proximity. The papal court had evolved into something resembling an imperial household more than a religious institution, complete with elaborate ceremonies, political intrigue, and moral compromises that would have scandalized earlier generations of Christians. The College of Cardinals included men whose primary qualifications were wealth and political connections rather than theological knowledge or spiritual devotion. The Borgia family had clawed their way to prominence through a combination of strategic marriages, calculated violence, and shameless bribery that made them notorious even by the standards of their era. Originally from Spain, they brought to Italian politics a ruthlessness that shocked contemporaries accustomed to more subtle forms of corruption. Rodrigo Borgia's path to the papacy was paved with gold, literally purchasing enough cardinal votes to secure his election in 1492 through the most brazen simony in church history. The conclave that elected Alexander VI was itself a masterpiece of corruption, with Borgia's agents distributing bags of silver and promising lucrative benefices to wavering cardinals throughout the voting process. Contemporary observers noted that mules loaded with treasure moved openly between cardinal residences in the days leading up to the election, making no attempt to conceal the transactional nature of what should have been a sacred process, guided by prayer and divine inspiration. Once installed as Pope, Alexander VI transformed the Vatican into a reflection of his own appetites and ambitions. The papal apartments were redecorated to accommodate lavish entertainments that pushed the boundaries of acceptable behavior even in Renaissance Italy. Rooms that had once hosted theological debates and spiritual contemplation now witnessed scenes of debauchery that contemporary chroniclers struggled to describe in language suitable for Christian readers. The Pope's personal household included numerous women who held no official position but enjoyed remarkable access and influence. These were not merely servants or administrative assistants, but companions whose primary function was to satisfy the pontiff's various appetites. Church records from the period, carefully preserved in Vatican archives despite their embarrassing content, document payments to these women that exceeded the salaries of many legitimate church officials. Alexander VI's most notorious relationship was with Julia Farnese, a young Roman noblewoman whose beauty had captured the aging Pope's attention despite the 45-year age difference between them. Julia, known throughout Rome as the Pope's whore, lived openly in the Vatican and bore him at least one child while he occupied the throne of St. Peter. Their relationship was conducted with such public flagrancy that foreign ambassadors reported on it in official dispatches, treating the Pope's mistress as a significant political figure whose favour could influence papal policy. The corruption extended far beyond mere sexual impropriety into realms of violence and blasphemy that shocked even hardened observers of Renaissance politics. The Pope's son, Cesare Borgia, used Vatican resources to fund military campaigns characterized by exceptional brutality, while his daughter Lucrezia served as a political pawn in marriages designed to advance family interests rather than serve the Church's mission. Family dinners in the papal apartments reportedly included discussions of murder, extortion, and military strategy conducted in the presence of religious artwork and sacred relics. The moral climate Alexander VI created within the Vatican attracted individuals whose own appetites ran toward the extreme and perverse. Cardinals and bishops who might have maintained some semblance of propriety under different leadership found themselves competing to demonstrate their loyalty through increasingly outrageous behavior. The papal court became a magnet for adventurers, criminals, and degenerates who saw opportunity in the complete abandonment of traditional moral constraints. Contemporary accounts describe regular entertainments held in the papal apartments that pushed far beyond mere social gatherings into territory that contemporary observers struggled to categorize. These events combined elements of political theatre, religious parody, and sexual display in ways that deliberately mocked the sacred traditions of the Church. Guests included not only high-ranking clerics and Roman nobility, but also prostitutes, actors, and various entertainers whose performances challenged every notion of appropriate behaviour within a holy space. The logistics of organizing such events within the Vatican required the complicity of numerous church officials who might have been expected to resist such obvious violations of their sacred duties. Instead, many embraced their roles as facilitators of the Pope's excesses, seeing participation as necessary for career advancement within a corrupted hierarchy where traditional virtues had become liabilities rather than assets. The international implications of Alexander VI's behaviour extended far beyond Rome's boundaries, as foreign courts struggled to maintain diplomatic relations with a pope whose conduct undermined the moral authority upon which church influence depended. Ambassadors found themselves in the awkward position of conducting serious political negotiations with a pontiff whose personal life had become the subject of scandalous gossip throughout European capitals. The most shocking aspect of Alexander VI's papacy was not simply the extent of his personal corruption, but the systematic way he transformed the institutional culture of the Church itself. Under his leadership, behaviours that would have resulted in excommunication for ordinary clergy became normalised within the highest levels of church hierarchy, creating a moral inversion that challenged the fundamental premises of Christian authority. The financial records of Alexander VI's pontificate reveal expenditures that would have bankrupted most European kingdoms, with vast sums dedicated not to charitable works or church construction, but to funding elaborate spectacles that served no purpose beyond satisfying the Pope's increasingly exotic tastes. Vatican account books from this period, preserved despite obvious attempts to obscure their contents, document payments for entertainers whose skills lay far outside the realm of traditional court performance. Musicians, dancers, and actors were retained not for religious ceremonies but for private gatherings whose nature can only be inferred from the astronomical costs involved and the secrecy surrounding their employment. The papal chamberlain's records indicate regular purchases of luxury goods that had no conceivable connection to religious duty, exotic perfumes from Constantinople, rare wines from distant provinces, and textiles whose primary virtue was their ability to be quickly removed rather than their appropriateness for clerical vestments. These accounts paint a picture of a papal household organized around pleasure rather than piety, where the pursuit of sensual gratification took precedence over spiritual obligations. More disturbing were the architectural modifications made to the Vatican during Alexander's reign, transformations that served no liturgical purpose but facilitated activities that contemporary observers found difficult to describe in acceptable language. Rooms were reconfigured with hidden passages and private chambers that allowed for discreet movement between apartments, while traditional spaces dedicated to prayer and contemplation were repurposed for entertainments that violated every principle of sacred architecture. The Pope's personal apartments underwent the most dramatic alterations, with the installation of elaborate bathing facilities that rivaled those of ancient Roman emperors in their opulence and exceeded them in their implications for moral conduct. These were not simple washing areas, but elaborate complexes designed to accommodate multiple occupants engaged in activities that had nothing to do with personal hygiene. Contemporary accounts describe marble pools fed by heated water and surrounded by artwork that depicted scenes so explicit they challenged the boundaries of what could be displayed within consecrated walls. Alexander VI's daily routine, as recorded by papal secretaries who maintained careful logs of his activities, reveals a schedule that inverted traditional clerical priorities. Morning prayers were abbreviated or eliminated entirely, while evening entertainments extended deep into the night with guest lists that included individuals whose presence within the Vatican would have been scandalous under any previous pontificate. The Pope's calendar shows regular appointments with visitors whose official purposes remain mysteriously vague, but whose extended stays and repeated visits suggest relationships that transcended normal diplomatic or administrative functions. The corruption of traditional religious ceremonies under Alexander's leadership represented perhaps the most profound violation of his sacred duties. Masses were conducted with obvious disregard for liturgical requirements, while papal audiences became opportunities for displays of wealth and power that emphasized earthly rather than spiritual authority. Foreign dignitaries reported attending religious services where the Pope's attention wandered openly to female members of the congregation, his behavior during sacred moments revealing priorities that had nothing to do with divine worship. The influence of Alexander's mistresses extended far beyond private chambers into the actual governance of the church, with women who held no official position exercising authority that belonged rightfully to ordained clergy. Julia Farnese in particular wielded power that allowed her to influence appointments, policy decisions, and financial matters in ways that made a mockery of canonical law. Her presence at meetings meant to address serious church business created situations where temporal and spiritual authority became subordinated to the whims of individuals whose primary qualification was their ability to satisfy the Pope's physical appetites. The papal household staff during this period included individuals whose duties existed nowhere in traditional church hierarchy, but whose roles were apparently essential to maintaining Alexander's lifestyle. These positions, funded through church revenues that should have supported charitable works and missionary activities, created a parallel bureaucracy dedicated entirely to facilitating behaviors that violated fundamental Christian principles. The normalization of such arrangements within the highest levels of church administration represented a corruption so thorough that it challenged the basic premise of religious authority. Contemporary chroniclers struggled to document the reality of Alexander VI's court without compromising their own positions within church hierarchy, leading to accounts that employed elaborate euphemisms and coded language to describe events that defied straightforward reporting. Even these sanitized versions convey the extraordinary nature of what transpired within the Vatican, suggesting that the full extent of the Pope's excesses may have been even more extreme than surviving records indicate. The international diplomatic community found itself confronting an unprecedented situation where the moral leader of Western Christianity conducted himself in ways that undermined every principle his office was meant to embody. Ambassadors reported difficulty maintaining serious negotiations with a pope whose personal conduct had become the subject of ribald jokes throughout European courts, while church officials in distant provinces struggled to maintain credibility when their ultimate superior had become synonymous with corruption and debauchery. The psychological impact on church hierarchy was profound and lasting, as bishops and cardinals who had devoted their lives to religious service found themselves serving under a pontiff whose behavior mocked everything they claimed to represent. Some fled Rome entirely rather than participate in or witness the ongoing degradation of their sacred institution, while others adapted by abandoning their own moral principles in favor of pragmatic accommodation to the new reality. The most shocking revelations emerged from the accounts of servants and minor officials who witnessed the daily operations of Alexander's household, individuals whose lowly positions paradoxically provided them with intimate access to events that more prominent figures were careful to avoid documenting. Their testimonies, preserved in various archives despite obvious attempts at suppression, describe a papal court where traditional boundaries between sacred and profane had been not merely crossed but obliterated entirely. The evening entertainments that became Alexander VI's signature contribution to papal tradition pushed beyond mere moral violation into territory that challenged contemporary understanding of human behavior itself. The preparation for these nocturnal gatherings required elaborate coordination that involved dozens of Vatican staff members, each sworn to absolute secrecy regarding what they witnessed or facilitated. The papal major domo maintained detailed guest lists that read like a catalogue of Roman society's most notorious figures. Wealthy merchants seeking papal favours, foreign nobles conducting diplomatic business, and an assortment of courtesans whose reputations preceded them through the marble corridors of St. Peter's. The careful orchestration of these events reveals Alexander's understanding that spectacle itself had become a form of political currency, where participation in his excesses served as both entertainment and demonstration of loyalty. The Vatican's transformation under Alexander VI extended to spaces that had been consecrated for centuries as places of prayer and contemplation. The Sistine Chapel, completed just decades earlier as a monument to divine glory, found its sacred purpose compromised by events that contemporary observers struggled to reconcile with its religious significance. While Michelangelo's ceiling would later inspire countless souls toward heaven, the floor beneath bore witness to gatherings that seemed designed to mock such aspirations entirely. The Pope's personal confessor, required by canon law to maintain absolute secrecy regarding papal sins, found himself in an impossible position as Alexander's behavior escalated beyond anything traditional theological training had prepared him to address. Church records suggest this unfortunate priest suffered a complete mental breakdown, abandoning his position rather than continue serving as spiritual counselor to a man whose actions defied every principle of Christian morality. His replacement lasted mere months before also fleeing Rome, creating a succession of confessors who found themselves unable to reconcile their religious duties with the reality of papal conduct. The financial implications of Alexander's lifestyle created ripple effects throughout the Church's global operations, as funds meant for missionary work, charitable assistance, and institutional maintenance were diverted to support entertainments that served no purpose beyond satisfying the Pope's increasingly exotic appetites. Monastery construction projects were abandoned half-completed, while universities dependent on papal support found their funding redirected toward purchases that had no conceivable connection to educational advancement. The Church's network of hospitals and orphanages struggled to maintain basic operations as their traditional papal subsidies vanished into Alexander's personal treasury. The most disturbing aspect of these financial diversions was their systematic nature, revealing not impulsive excess, but calculated prioritization of personal pleasure over institutional responsibility. Vatican accountants developed elaborate methods for disguising expenditures that would have scandalized even secular authorities, creating fictional categories of expense that concealed the true nature of papal spending. These accounting innovations would later serve as models for corruption throughout European courts, as nobles learned to emulate Borgia methods for hiding inappropriate uses of public funds. The Pope's relationship with his children, particularly Cesare and Lucrezia Borgia, created additional layers of scandal that compounded the moral crisis surrounding his pontificate. Family gatherings in the papal apartments regularly included discussions of political murder, strategic marriages designed to advance family power, and military campaigns funded through church resources. The presence of Alexander's offspring at official church functions created situations where the fruits of papal sexual misconduct served as living reminders of his violation of celibacy vows. Cesare Borgia's military campaigns, conducted with papal blessing and Vatican financing, introduced levels of brutality that shocked even hardened Renaissance warriors. Cities that resisted Borgia expansion faced not merely military defeat, but systematic terror designed to break the will of entire populations. These campaigns were planned and coordinated from within the Vatican itself, transforming the seat of Christian mercy into a headquarters for strategic cruelty that rivaled anything produced by secular tyrants. The international implications of Alexander's behavior extended far beyond diplomatic embarrassment into questions about the fundamental legitimacy of papal authority itself. Protestant reformers seized upon accounts of Vatican corruption as evidence that the Catholic Church had lost any claim to moral leadership, while Orthodox Christians pointed to Roman decadence as justification for their continued separation from papal authority. Even loyal Catholic monarchs found themselves struggling to defend an institution whose leader had become synonymous with everything Christianity supposedly opposed. The most notorious evening entertainment organized during Alexander's reign occurred in October 1501, an event that contemporary chroniclers referred to obliquely as the Chestnut Banquet, but whose true nature was far more shocking than this innocent designation suggested. The gathering brought together 50 of Rome's most beautiful courtesans, with an equal number of church officials, creating a spectacle that combined religious parody with sexual display in ways that challenged every boundary of acceptable behavior within sacred walls. The evening began with what appeared to be a traditional papal reception, complete with formal presentations and ceremonial greetings that maintained the pretense of legitimate church business. As wine flowed and inhibitions dissolved, however, the gathering transformed into something that witnesses struggled to describe in language appropriate for Christian readers. The presence of high-ranking cardinals and bishops alongside professional prostitutes created scenes that inverted every principle of clerical dignity, while the Pope himself presided over activities that mocked the sacred vows he had sworn to uphold. Contemporary accounts describe competitions organized for the entertainment of papal guests, contests that involved activities so explicit that even Renaissance observers, accustomed to considerable moral flexibility, found themselves shocked by what they witnessed. Prizes were awarded not for demonstrations of virtue or learning, but for performances that celebrated human appetites in their most base and unrestricted forms. The Pope's personal participation in judging these contests revealed the complete abandonment of any pretense that his office retained connection to spiritual authority. The aftermath of this particular gathering created political complications that extended far beyond Rome's boundaries, as word of the Pope's behavior spread through diplomatic channels to courts across Europe. Foreign ambassadors found themselves unable to report the full scope of what they had witnessed without compromising their own reputations, while church officials who had participated faced the impossible choice between acknowledging their complicity and maintaining their positions within an increasingly corrupted hierarchy. The Vatican's domestic staff, sworn to secrecy regarding papal activities, struggled to maintain the physical spaces where such events occurred, as the aftermath of Alexander's entertainments left sacred chambers requiring cleaning and restoration that went far beyond normal maintenance. The irony was not lost on contemporary observers that rooms consecrated for divine worship needed purification after hosting activities that celebrated everything Christianity condemned. The servants responsible for this restoration work found themselves complicit in maintaining a facade of sanctity that concealed systematic violation of the very principles their workplace was meant to embody. The psychological impact on church hierarchy extended beyond mere embarrassment into genuine spiritual crisis, as bishops and cardinals who had devoted their lives to religious service confronted the reality that their ultimate superior had transformed the papacy into an instrument of personal gratification rather than divine service. Some responded by retreating into private devotion, attempting to maintain their own spiritual integrity while minimizing contact with papal corruption. Others embraced the new reality, calculating that advancement within Alexander's church required abandonment of traditional moral constraints in favor of pragmatic accommodation to papal appetites. The most troubling aspect of Alexander VI's pontificate was not simply the extent of his personal corruption, but the systematic way his behavior influenced institutional culture throughout the church hierarchy. Bishops who might have maintained moral standards under different leadership found themselves competing to demonstrate loyalty through increasingly compromising behavior, while lower clergy learned that advancement required skills that had nothing to do with theological knowledge or pastoral care. The normalization of extreme corruption within the highest levels of church administration created a moral climate that would require generations to reform. The international diplomatic community found itself navigating unprecedented challenges as they attempted to maintain relations with a papal court that had abandoned traditional protocols in favor of entertainments that challenged basic assumptions about appropriate behavior within religious contexts. Treaties were negotiated in environments where sacred and profane had become so intermingled that foreign representatives struggled to maintain the dignity their own positions required while participating in papal functions that mocked everything their Christian constituencies expected from church leadership. The legacy of Alexander VI's reign would extend far beyond his own death, creating institutional damage that required decades of careful reform to address. The corruption he normalized within papal administration established precedents that would influence church politics for generations, while the international scandal of his behavior provided ammunition for critics who questioned the fundamental legitimacy of papal authority. The transformation of the Vatican from spiritual center into playground for personal appetites represented not merely individual moral failure, but institutional collapse that challenged the basic premises upon which Catholic Christianity had been built. The reign of Alexander VI stands as perhaps history's most profound example of how absolute power can corrupt absolutely, transforming the highest office in Christendom into a monument to human depravity. What we have witnessed in these accounts goes far beyond mere scandal or political intrigue. This was the systematic destruction of moral authority conducted by the very man entrusted to uphold it. The Borgia Pope's legacy serves as a stark reminder that institutions, no matter how sacred or ancient, remain vulnerable to the appetites of those who claim to lead them. The Vatican, under Alexander VI, became a theatre of corruption so complete that it challenged the fundamental premises of religious authority itself. His transformation of papal apartments into venues for orgies, his open relationships with multiple mistresses, and his use of church resources to fund personal pleasures created a moral crisis that reverberated throughout Christian Europe. The man who should have been Christ's representative on earth instead became a symbol of everything Christianity opposed. Perhaps most disturbing was not Alexander's personal corruption, but his systematic normalization of extreme behavior throughout church hierarchy. Cardinals and bishops who should have resisted such obvious violations of sacred duty instead competed to demonstrate loyalty through increasingly compromising actions. The institutional damage he inflicted required generations to repair and provided Protestant reformers with ammunition that would ultimately fracture Christian unity forever. As we reflect on this dark chapter of papal history, we confront uncomfortable truths about power, corruption, and the human capacity for moral compromise. Alexander VI's story reminds us that the greatest threats to institutional integrity often come not from external enemies, but from those entrusted with leadership itself.